Okay, so we've talked about the foundations a little bit, but now I really want to get into some good, meaty, chunky foundations, okay? And like everything, probably frame them in a way you might not have heard of before. So we're going to touch on our final chapter for Module 3, which is boundaries and busyness. First question I want to ask you is, do we think that stress is bad for us? Because a lot of us spend a lot of time feeling stressed. We have stressful jobs. There are often clear peaks of overwhelm and sometimes clear peaks of frustration and burnout. And it can start to feel like that's a disaster, right? But there's a couple of things I want to talk about. Most of us in the veterinary field understand that stress and distress are different things, okay? So putting an animal under stress, for example, bringing your average friendly Cocker Spaniel into the vet clinic is quite stressful for them. It's not distressing for them. And therefore, it's not to be avoided, okay? Because if we set our puppies up to never experience stress, if we never take our puppy to the vet clinic, then our older dogs are never going to have learned how to deal with a little bit of stress. And then suddenly those things are very distressing. So it's really important to acknowledge that avoiding stress is not the goal. If you finish your work day going, oh, that was stressful, but you have some dinner, you sit down and you feel, maybe physically exhausted, but your brain is still there, that's okay. Stress is good for us. It stretches us. It helps us learn. It helps us grow. It builds these resilience muscles that we're talking about. So it's only when it becomes distress, as opposed to eustress, that we question it, okay? In that, is this going to be good for us long term? Now, it is still important to note that for many of us, short, finite periods of distress are still perfectly fine for us, okay? You would expect, if you were in a veterinary role, to have periods of distress, crashing animals, angry clients, over, too many cases all at the same time, okay? But as long as that distress is finite and you have the time to take your elastic band stressor and decompress back to your normal self at some point afterwards, and that might be after that stressful hour or after that really crazy busy week or even that really difficult month because we were short staffed while we were recruiting a new person, that's okay. Sitting in those spaces for a finite fixed period with an end in sight, your rubber band might be pretty darn stretched. And it might even take a bit longer to go back to its original form. But if you're practicing good tools to protect yourself, then that's okay. It's when that distress becomes chronic that we really want to challenge. This is not a place that we want to be. This is not where we want to stay. One of my favorite studies about stress actually is, it really challenges so many of our beliefs about stress being a great thing or a bad thing. So basically what they did, right, is they asked a bunch of people whether or not they believed stress is good for them or bad for them. And then they tracked them over, just, I think, like 15 years. And they looked at morbidity and mortality. So how sick did these people get with what and how early did they die? And what they found is that there is a group of people in which there is a strong correlation between stress and morbidity or mortality. And there is another group of people in whom there is no correlation between morbidity, mortality, and stress. Do you want to know what the difference is between those groups of people? It's whether or not they believe the stress is bad for them. So people who believe that stress is overwhelming and that it's going to be bad for their health, they get stressed about their stress. And that stress genuinely causes health outcomes. People who believe that stress is an enjoyable and necessary way to grow generally have no negative health outcomes from that stress. So now I'm not saying that you can just, positivity away your stress levels, because that's not helpful either. But what I am saying is that it's important not to get stressed about the fact that you're stressed, okay? Put it in context. Is this a period of overwhelm that is finite and that we're going to move through and we're going to set ourselves up to make sure our rubber band takes its time back later? In which case, you don't need to be frustrated by this. You don't need to be worried about this. It's a period, it's a time, okay? And in fact, most of us work best when we are a little bit stressed. Somewhere between the very, very finite tipping point between fatigue and exhausted is actually where most of us do our best work, get our best outcomes, and feel the most fulfilled. A vast proportion of us would do very poorly if we were unstretched, working in a factory, just putting the same nut on the same bolt over and over and over and over and over again all day, right? Most of us would find that incredibly stressful as well. So we actually are well designed to work at the peak of our sort of the bell curve of stress level. It's not until it tips over into distress or tips under into what we'd call underload that it's bad for us. And even then, it's still for a finite period of time. We can cope. We know that, when there's a really quiet day in the clinic, it's like, oh, yes, this is great underload. I've been so stressed for ages. But if that, 2 appointments a day thing happens for more than a week, oh my God, the boredom. So, all of these things in balance. Let's talk boundaries, okay? So, how many of you have all been told previously that you need to set good boundaries and take your lunch break and all of this stuff? And what happens is they inevitably get broken. And then either we resent the people who broke them, which is not quite what happened, or we get frustrated at ourselves, or we get exhausted because we have this kind of, oh my God, I haven't had a lunch break. Or we create this kind of culture internally of just having no boundaries and walking all over each other. So I want to talk about boundaries in a way that can actually give us a chance of setting them. So there's a few different elements of this. Firstly, the type of boundary you're setting. Most of us just think a boundary is a boundary, right? Say I'm not going to do something and not do something, then that's fine. And if you do the thing, then you broke the boundary. As it turns out, it's not that simple, nor should it be, okay? My favorite way to think about boundaries is the difference between hard and soft boundaries. And we talked about resilience as a brick wall or a rubber band. Try to think about boundaries as a little bit similar. You can have a brick wall boundary that's really robust. I will never do that thing. That is not okay. I'm totally against that. Or you can have a rubber band, or I tend to think of it more like a trampoline boundary, which is not great. Okay, taking the hit, and now I'm going to bounce back from that. All right. So, to give you an example, boundaries in my life, I have a very clear one that I don't answer the phone, think about work, engage in work between 6:30 and 7:30 in the evening because I'm putting my kid to bed. And that's a hard boundary. There's pretty much no circumstance that I will ring somebody or call a client back during that time. There has been an exception. I was the manager of wildlife health when the lions got out at Taronga Zoo. I was taking calls that day. So there's always going to be an exception, but it's a clearly communicated and strategic exception that I was more than happy to make. I clearly communicate that boundary. Everybody that works with me knows that these things are true. My auto replies on my emails, those sorts of things all say this. There is no expectation from anybody that I should do different, and I don't expect myself to do different, and I have no guilt when I pick up the phone a little bit later and I've got a couple of missed texts, missed calls, and I need to respond. I also, however, have a soft boundary that I don't work Wednesdays. I spend Wednesdays with my child, and I run a business. I get a lot of emails on Wednesdays. I get a lot of clients calling me, and I have things I need to do or things I need to check, or, there is somebody else has arranged an event or a webinar that they want me to join. And the thing is, if I let myself get frustrated by those things that keep happening on Wednesdays, that frustration is exhausting. The resentment of the person who wants to talk to me or, ignored my auto reply on my email. I get frustrated, and frustration is exhausting. Or, of course, I could just hold the hard boundary. I never work Wednesdays, but then I come in Thursday, I'm even more overwhelmed because now I feel a lot of guilt and people that I've missed, and maybe I've missed work, or maybe I've, let someone down. And it's not actually a helpful emotion. So instead, I hold a soft boundary. Yep, my auto reply says I'm not here today, so that if I don't want to respond to that thing, nobody is surprised by that. But in fact, if I see a message from somebody, or if I get a call, or if somebody invites me to join something on that day, I can go, yeah, okay, I'll do that without the resentment because I know I will take the bounce back. and I might finish a bit early on Friday, or I might, walk the dog during my lunch break later today, or, I'm going to do something special differently. It's about understanding the give and the take to remove the resentment and the frustration from your boundaries being bent. Okay, so what that looks like for us in clinical practice or in an animal shelter is, okay, well, a blocked cat came in 5 minutes before closing time. You could be annoyed and frustrated because this job sucks and I always have to stay late. Or you could go, all right, clearly I need to see the blocked cat. I'm here an extra 90 minutes today. I'm going to talk to my boss about leaving an hour early on Friday. All right, somebody took your lunch break because there was a seizuring dog. That is frustrating. I was really looking forward to eating my pasta. I'm going to talk to reception about finding me a spot later in the day to have 20 minutes so I can leave the building and eat my food. So a hard boundary would be, no, I want my lunch break, or no, I never work late. And all that happens is either you get frustrated and annoyed, or other people get frustrated and annoyed at you, or you have a soft boundary, which is, it is important to me that I get time to leave the building and pee today. And that is what you hold at all costs. So if your lunch break does get taken, you take responsibility for finding the give and the take in that, right? Yeah. The same goes in any setting. If it's taking work home with you, well, why are you deciding to do it? What's the trade off? And what are you taking back? And don't expect anybody else to be responsible for that taking back for you. You have to take accountability for it's your boundary. You chose to have it. Make sure you're controlling your trampoline, right? And also communicate these things. If you hold a boundary in your head that nobody else knows about and all it is frustrating for other people because you're like, no, I don't work late. No, I won't do that at my lunch break. That's unhelpful. And in fact, that's one of the other things I wanted to talk about is having team boundaries. What is a good reason to ring me on the weekend? What is a good reason to interrupt my lunch break? Seizuring dog? Yes. Sign a vaccine certificate? No. What is the minimum requirement for us to have time to ourselves during the day? Full hour lunch break sitting in the sunshine? In an ideal world, yes. If that's not feasible, everybody should be allowed to not get UTIs from not being able to go to the toilet often enough. So let's talk about this as a team, because so much frustration about boundaries isn't about the boundary, it's about communication. Let's agree stuff. Make a policy as an organization. What do we accept at 10 minutes to closing time? What do we do with a case that walks in the door at 5 minutes to closing time? Have it written down, because the moral trauma of either person on reception or the vet having to be like, no, I won't see that, or yes, I guess I'll cave on another boundary again, or the guilt or the worry that reception feels about asking the vet to see that case, all of those emotions could be avoided if it was simply, this is written down. We don't see this type of patient, or yeah, we do see this type of patient, and here's what you do to get your time back afterwards. Remove the moral trauma from the moment by having all agreed to it up front, okay? I also want to talk about technology. Okay. We have a tendency to make technology the bad guy, okay, as if we are the victims of our phones and our social medias. Now, don't get me wrong, I am as guilty as anybody else, and I have just as much trouble as anybody else at switching off my phone and being away from it. The terminology of phone addictions, I 100% agree with. It is creating a dopamine gap in our brains. We become attached to having them and we don't know what to do without them. That's a whole different section we'll talk about later. But we have a tendency to make it like we're the victims of this, okay, without remembering that we can also use technology to our advantage, and we have choices that we can make to use technology at least as much as it uses us. So, what that looks like is making your choices around your auto replies, around having your work phone with you at all times, or not having a work phone and just getting a dual SIM card, about having push notifications on work apps, about your workplace allowing you or requiring you, which should not happen, to use a personal tool such as WhatsApp or Facebook for work communications. Because then at 9 o'clock at night, when you get a ding from Facebook, you have to worry about whether that's going to be work or whether that's going to be a personal thing. We can use technology to our advantage, and almost all of these things can be built into most of your apps to not contact you between set hours, to just uninstall the app when you're on 2 weeks of annual leave, to write an email in Outlook. And even though your brain works best at 1 o'clock in the morning when you need to get it off of the chest, you don't want your team to feel like that you expect a response, or that they, that you're being a martyr doing it that late. Okay, just set the button that sends it at the beginning of your workday tomorrow. Use technology to help us not be in the way of our boundaries. Okay, I also want to talk about emotional boundaries. Okay, that means not just protecting your time, but protecting your emotional energy. This is where it becomes important to recognize what is draining you. Okay, and for a lot of us, we are caring people. Remember that empathy piece? We have a tendency to get stuck in workplace drama, or to jump into someone else's feelings of hurt with them, or get caught up in gossip. We really want to make sure that we're setting good boundaries around our emotional energy as well. Okay, so what that can look like, if people are coming to you to vent, ask them, do you want solutions, or are you just wanting a sounding board? And if they just want a sounding board, tell them when you're available. Oh, can we do this after work at a coffee? Like, happy to go with you on Saturday. Or I've got 20 minutes between this thing and this thing. Now I'm a bit overloaded. Okay. If, on the other hand, they actually want solutions, don't put it in your brain to have to come up with the solutions. Ask them questions. What have you tried already? What do you think the next step is? What's going on? What do you think could solve this? What do you need? How can I support you? That's not the same as you trying to solve their problems for them. All right. Make choices to protect your energy. And last but not least, on the boundaries, I want to talk about leaving work at work. Now, we're going to touch in the last module about work-life balance and how we make them mesh together well. But leaving work at work really is about deciding when you are present for what thing. Okay. Because as much as it would be nice to kind of be like, oh, I can bring my whole self to work and my work self home, we know it's not quite that simple. So, assuming you are in a 9 to 5 or a set hours job, all right, I want you to think about what ritual you are going to do to make sure you're making the mental shift out of work mode. And what examples of that, I've seen a team of surgeons who every day when they put their wedding rings back on at the end of the day, they have a really nice hand cream that their manager pays for, and that, end of day, you just sort of stop and you give yourself a nice hand massage with this yummy smelling, calming lavender stuff as you're putting your ring back on. Most people make it kind of into a bit of a thing. They take 60 seconds to 2 minutes. And during that time, they're making the choice. Okay, I'm out the door. Work's done. Some people use their commute. Maybe they use their commute to like mull over all of the things at work so that when they get to the front door, that's the end of it. Other people use the commute for the exact opposite and put on a fantasy audiobook so that they are really generally defragging and are in a completely different mindset by the time they get home. I've always used the dog. I used to get back in, from a day at work, and I pretty much set my front door up to be able that I would walk in the front door, and how nice it was to have the happy waggy tail, happy to see you, no matter what's happened to you or him, he's happy to see you. And I would sit down on the floor and we would spend anywhere between 1 and 5 minutes just cuddling with him being cute. And that was my mental time to reset. Now I work from home, so I don't even get to do that, but I still choose the moment to differentiate between my home life and my work life. Even though the dog's been at my feet all day, I still make the choice to step out of my office and sit down on the floor for a few minutes with the dog, because that is the time at which my brain makes the switch. So it doesn't matter what it is for you, but I do want you to start thinking about what can you mindfully do to commit to leaving work behind now.